Well, I was born and raised at Mountain View, down in the southwest corner of the state, down by Evanston. I graduated from college in 1965, got home on Friday, and Monday I had my draft notice. And I didn't really want to be drafted, so I started trying to get into the officer program, and I was accepted into naval flight training. And I flew to Seattle, Washington, and was sworn in November of '65. And my class starting date was in March of '66. I'd been dating the same girl for probably 3 years, and we decided to get married. So I got married January 29th of 1966, and then left for Pensacola, Florida for training in March 3rd, I think was the date, or March 4th, one of those two. And went through the flight syllabus and ended up being assigned to VA 35 in Oceana, Virginia. We trained there for a while, and then we got orders to the USS Enterprise to join Carrier Air Wing 9. And in November, we went out to NAS Alameda for care quals and to get acquainted with the squadron. And we flew sorties off the Enterprise out in the Pacific for a month. And then we had 2 weeks stand out at Christmas time and went back to Virginia Beach and said goodbye to the family and so forth. And I had one little boy then whoops, I'm getting this story screwed up. After I got my flight training completed and I'm going to Vietnam now, I had one kid, and now I've got another one pregnant that's coming in March. We left San Francisco January 1st of '68, I guess, and headed for Vietnam. And we stopped in Hawaii for overnight and refueled and picked up supplies and so forth, and then we headed for Vietnam again. By the afternoon, it was obvious that we were no longer going towards the Philippines. We were headed north, and word got out around the ship that we were headed for off the coast of Korea, and it's when the USS Pueblo was spiked by the North Koreans. And so we stayed up there for probably 3 weeks, planning flights. Every night we'd plan a strike for the next day on North Vietnam to try and get the crew back. We never launched an actual sortie, but we did a lot of flying up there with a lot of training, and we launched off the carrier and everything during the daytime, and then at night we'd plan a strike for the next day in about every possible place in North Vietnam, in North Korea, but the word never came to launch. So finally we went on to the Philippines and then went to Yankee Station and relieved, I think it was a Kitty Hawk that had been out there for 60 plus days while we were on our way over. We got there February 27th or something. And anyway, from my most memorable story, if you want that, is we got there, and first you have to fly during the day to get requalified again on landing on the airplane or on the aircraft carrier and taking off. And then you go into night ops, and I flew an A6 Intruder. It was a Bombardier Navigator, a two-seater side by side, and there's pictures in there. But we had 40 crew members, 20 pilots and 20 Bombardier Navigators when we got over there. And by March 17th, between February 28th and March 17th, we'd lost 8 of them. They'd either been shot down, flew into a mountain, flew into the water, whatever. 2 of them were captured by the North Vietnamese and were ultimately released. But it was a very hardening experience, I guess, knowing that your next flight may be your last. We had collateral duties on the ship. One of mine was a personal affairs officer, so I had to write the letters to the widows for the commanding officer that he signed, expressing his sorrow and everything. And when you knew these people, it was pretty hard to do. You knew the wife that you were writing to and everything. And then in addition to that, you had to get their cruise box and pack up all their personal stuff and get it ready to send home. So we stayed for about a month, and then they took us back to the Philippines, and we got to go to Bangkok, Thailand for R&R. and we lived in Bangkok like there was no tomorrow. We stopped on the way over in July. It was on a C-130 maybe, a cargo airplane. It's uncomfortable as hell, no air conditioning. It was hotter than hell. But we got a nice motel and everything in Bangkok. And when we came back, we were supposed to, everybody had to take a turn and go into Hanoi and dropping bombs on Hanoi. And that was, you only had a 50-50 shot at best of coming back from Hanoi. One of the reasons being it was so well fortified and protected was a problem, but also it was, in addition to being heavily defended, it was so far inland that if you got hit, you didn't have much of a chance to get back out over water. Whereas if you went to bomb Vinh or Haiphong, if you got hit, you had a pretty good chance of getting back out over water. You may get shot down, but you could, unless you had an absolute disaster, you could get back out over the water and presumably get picked up. But Hanoi, it was just too far. And while we were in Bangkok, President Johnson came out and said we're not going to bomb north of the 20th parallel, which meant Vinh was the most heavily defended target that there would be left to bomb. And North Vietnam kind of comes down and gets real narrow. And it really took most of the hard targets away other than the city of Vinh. And so we didn't lose any more crew members until the last day that we were going to be out there. We all had to fly one more time, and you had to have good communication with your pilot. I was the bombardier navigator. Our plane was an all-weather attack aircraft. We liked to go in at night in the dark with all the lights off, and we were 50 feet above the ground, moving at 550 knots. And I did all the work as far. He drove the plane, and I guided us with the navigation system and the radar and set it up, and then I was responsible for acquiring the target and releasing the bombs. Okay, you had to have excellent coordination with your pilot, and if I said pull up, he didn't say what or why or anything, he pulled up. Because when you're doing that fast, 50 feet above the ground, there's no room for air. And the good part about being the bombardier navigator, I guess I had my head in this screen, so you couldn't see all the tracers that were being shot up at you, whereas he did. But anyway, on the last flight, it was a daylight flight. And so before we left, we said, we're coming home. If the bombs don't come off, we're only making one run. It was going to be a daylight run, and he was going to drop them off. And so we'd roll in from 23,000 feet, and then he would drop the bombs on the bridge that we were after. And so we went in and dropped our bombs. They come off. We're happy. We're back out over water, and we know that we're going to be going home. Well, we had one pilot who was gung-ho, as a good pilot and a good aviator, but his bombs didn't come off, and he was being shot at. And we were out circling over the water watching him and knew that he was getting shot at. And he called in and said that he was going to make another run, see if he'd get his bombs off. And we all said, no, don't worry about it. Just drop your bombs in the sea and get the hell out of there. You're being shot at. And he said, well, I'll try one more time. Well, he rolled in again, and you could see him being shot at. And they came off on one side, but not the other. And rather than get the hell out of there, he decided he'd make one more run. And before he even got a chance to get his bombs off, they hit him. And they both ejected, the pilot and the BN both. They were on the ground because we were talking to them, and we could hear the Vietnamese in the background. And jumping ahead, the BN came back as a prisoner when the prisoners were released, and the pilot was shot by the North Vietnamese. He was pretty loud, and he was boisterous, and I'm sure he was not going to be taken captured. And so we only lost 2 more people for the other 3 months. That's my biggest memory, I guess, of being in Vietnam, is losing that many people and heartaches of it.
How do you feel about the event that the state put on? How do you feel that the populace is accepting it, or as a whole?
The thing we're having here?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I think this is excellent. I think it's overdue. I think probably a lot of veterans were soured that didn't think this was going to be near the thing that it is. And I would hope that they would do it again sometime with the word getting out, and I'm sure we'd have a lot bigger attendance. My uncle was a career Air Force, who's 6 years older than I am, and never saw Vietnam, but he was in the military all along, and he lives in Colorado Springs, and I told him about it and wanted him to come, and he said, well, I didn't serve in Vietnam. And I said, it's Vietnam era, and you were Vietnam era. So I kept on him about coming, and today, after the ceremony and everything, I said, so are you glad you come? And he said, yeah, I am. He said, I knew I didn't go to Vietnam, and he felt kind of guilty about it. And he said, I told my friends down there at the academy and so forth that I'm not sure what it is, but my nephew said it's going to be a big deal, and so I'm trusting him, and I'm going to go. And he said, I'm glad you asked me, and I'm glad I came. And I think that would be a lot of the other veterans in Wyoming, and now that the word is out of how great it is. As far as me personally, when I came home, being a flight crew member, we stayed in the Philippines while the ship left. And there's a line, I don't remember where it is, that the ship has to cross before they're subject to being recalled to go back. And so we stayed for probably 24 hours while the ship was headed home, and then we flew from there to Japan and landed and took on fuel, and then went to Alaska, in Fairbanks, Alaska, and landed and took on fuel, and then into San Francisco. And we got Stars and Stripes, the paper, and knew that the war was getting very unpopular, and we knew about Jane Fonda and all that crap. And anyway, they just said we were in uniform when we got to San Francisco, and before we left, they said, pack in your bag, have civilian clothes, and before you leave, when you get to the airport in San Francisco, take your uniform off and put on civilian clothes, so that people theoretically didn't know you were military, but the haircuts and everything else, it was pretty obvious you were military. And so then I flew from San Francisco to Salt Lake City, and my wife picked me up there. And so we never experienced direct hatred, I guess, from the populace or anything. We went from my hometown, Mountain View is still only 1,300 people, so there was not a lot of rebel rousers there that would come up and try and do anything. And then the rest of the time, I guess we were with military until I got out, and then went to Green Bay, Wisconsin, which was pretty conservative, and we didn't have any problem there. My wife told me today, and I didn't know it, that my mother-in-law, her mother, was really against the war, and her sister was too. They treated me fine. I knew that sister was, but I didn't know that her mother was too, because she treated me fine and everything.
Is there anything else you'd like to say, sir?
No, it was a good life. I'm glad that I did it. I guess the other thing I'd say is, when I said that when I got my draft notice, I didn't want to go in on the ground, number one, but number two, since I had a college degree, I want to make a little bit more money, but I want to have better accommodations too. So the only officer program that I could get into at that time was naval flight training, and I really didn't want to fly. And so the recruiter said, well, once you get your commission and you're an ensign, all you got to do is drop out of the flight program, and you're still an officer, and you'll serve your 4 years and everything. And so as we went through the training at each level, all these people that I was friends with that wanted to be a aviator from the time they were little, they kept having to drop out because one of them got airsick. He could not go more than 15 minutes in an airplane without starting to throw up. Some of them couldn't pass the academics. Some of them couldn't pass the physical training, and these are people that really wanted to do that. And I just felt that I can do it, and so I'm not gonna quit.
All right, sir.
Okay, so we got back in late June of '68, and right away we got orders that we were going to redeploy again in September on the Coral Sea. And so that was pretty short turnaround time. And I had my daughter was born in March while I was over there. And so I hadn't seen her very much. My son, I'd only been around him for 6 months. He was still a toddler too. And so the point of transitioning crews, the people that had made 2 tours were getting orders to go somewhere else, and we were bringing in new people. And so we had to do the training. And like I said, it was an all-weather attack aircraft, and so there was a lot of night flying and stuff. And we got back and started flying again in July. And almost immediately we had 2 airplanes from our squadron with new people fly into each other and killed 3 of them on the spot. Then the next week we had another an older person and a young pilot flew into a mountain practicing the low level. Everything, it just seemed like the squadron was jinxed. And so I was getting nervous, and because now I was senior, so I was going to have to fly with somebody who didn't have much experience before. And the A6 is configured that if something happens to the pilot, all you can do is bail out. You cannot fly the plane because you can't reach any of the controls or anything, just even though you're sitting side by side. And so anyway, we got our orders. We went to San Francisco again to NAS Alameda and joined the Air Wing on the Coral Sea. And we were having getting acquainted with the Air Wing, and we were practicing out off the coast, flying and landing on a carrier and so forth. And then they came out with orders. The program I went into was a reserve officer, and they said that anyone who has a rotation date of June of the following year or sooner, he has to either augment into the regular Navy or they'll be a civilian next month. And so my commanding officer said, well, that doesn't apply to you. And I said, well, okay, that's all right with me. And so anyway, he called the Pentagon and found out it did. And so they give me like 24 hours to decide whether I want to basically make it a career or get out. And my choice at that time, we were going to be gone for a year. And I kept thinking about, all the people that we had lost and what's my chances of coming home. I'm going to be away from my family. And it was hard to make an intelligent, informed decision. But of course, my wife said, get out, get out. And I had kind of thought up to that point, if I came back alive, I would probably make it a career. And my commanding officer said he'd get me orders to postgraduate school in Monterey. And so I kind of had a future. And now all of a sudden, in a month, I'm going to be a civilian. I don't know where I'm going to live, what I'm going to do. I got a wife, I got 2 kids. And so it was a hard decision, but I elected to get out. Probably a lot of it out of fear that I would not come back.
So you made the right decision.
And you can't look back now, but it was hard to do. Had I not been presented that choice, the way it turned out, people that had been in the squadron shorter time than I did, they all of a sudden they're winding the war down. They were home by Christmas, so I'd have been home. Had I not got shot down, of course, I would have been home before Christmas, and had the resume where I could have had a good military career. On the other hand, it also meant every 2 years you're going to be ordered to sea, and so you're going to be gone a lot too. So we just accepted I had to do something else and moved on.